So this is the requirement for the project, and again, you're pretty much free to do what you want. I mean, sure, come and ask me if it's okay, if you want. But the first thing I'm going to ask you, does it meet the requirements? Right? Does it have at least two types of users? Does it have be able to log in, register a profile? Does it connect to a remote API? Can you query that API and list the results from that API? Can you store any one of those elements? Can you look at the details for any one of those API objects? Can you maybe bookmark one of them, or maybe store a cached version of any one of these objects onto your database? Are you creating relationships between users and these objects? How about objects between objects? Are you creating a relationship between them? How about a relationship between a user and another user, right? So all those are general requirements of any project. As long as you have those generic requirements, then you're all set. You don't need to ask me whether this, how about this, how about that, okay? If you think you are, if you fall outside of the boundaries here, right? If you fall within the boundaries, well within the boundaries, no need to even ask for permission, right? If you fall outside of the boundaries, then come and see me. Maybe we can negotiate, right? Maybe how about instead of doing this feature, I do this other feature, okay? And if I think it's the complexity is comparable, then we'll say sure, right? Also, the complexity goes up depending on how many team members you have, right? So as we'll see a little later, depending on whether you're one team, one person team, or two or three, right? The complexity increases proportionally, right? Also, any undergraduates that are taking the course, right? All of you. But as 4500 or as 5610? 5610? Okay, so no special cases for you. If you're taking as 4500, well, no, we'll be a little more lenient. I know you guys have a much tougher schedule than the graduate folks. So one of the major things that we'll ask you to do is that there should be two types of users, right? So there might be maybe a faculty and a student. There may be a buyer and a seller. Two types of users, yes? Plus an admin user. Right? So an admin user, like a God user, a super user that can do everything. But then you have specific types of users that have specific use cases, right? And the complexity there is that each type of user will have a different set of interfaces, right? If I'm a buyer, then I can search for items, I can add it to my shopping cart, I can create an order, I can cancel an order, but I can't change the price, I can't change the description, I can't add products, yes? So I shouldn't be, as a buyer, I shouldn't have access to any of those pages, yes? If I log in as a seller, then certainly I can add new products, I can change prices, description, and whatnot, have different stores, yes? So the complexity there is that right, the more types of users, the more types of user interfaces you'll have to create, correct? Also, these types of users, I mean types of end users, right? End user meaning the folks who this is targeted for, right? The audience of this application, okay? An admin user is not an audience, right? There are few of those, right? Just a couple of dozen administrators for the system, right? Whereas there might be thousands of end users who use your application. Make sense? So certainly some of the criteria of designing pages for end users is a little bit different than the criteria of designing pages for an internal user. Yes. Certainly for end users, we're looking to look pretty and not overwhelm the end user. Lay out things that make sense. We might spread the data across in several pages, right? Just ask first for the billing information, and then the shipping information, and then the credit information, right? And just spread it over several pages, just to make it easier on the end user. Yes. For an admin user, the criteria is a little bit different, right? Presumably, the end user, the admin user, is a power user, right? They don't need things to be as pretty and laid out in a special way. They might be okay with having lots of tables, and lots of and they can consume data at a much higher rate, right? And they're willing to they're more forgiving on some of the UX experience. Yes. Nevertheless, in both cases, they should look nice and usable and functional, right? But nevertheless, the criteria is a little bit different. Yes. Right. So for admin users, certainly more tabular data that you can scroll and whatnot. Lots of data is okay, right? And long lists are okay too, right? But not for an end user. Anyway, there's also another type of user, the unknown user, or the user who has not logged in. Says, I don't know who this person is. Nevertheless, there should be something for the anonymous user to do. Okay. So one of the requirements is that even anonymous users should be able to do something. Okay. Even though they don't have a profile, they don't have we don't know who they are, and we might not let them do certain things. They should they should be able to do. Okay. Maybe if it's products, you should be able to search for products. Okay. Or maybe peruse through your restaurant menu, right? Even though we don't know who they are. Okay. Not until we need to know who they are, right? Then we will challenge them on either logging in or registering, or right, if they're only reading and consuming data, then it might be okay not to force them to log in, right? But if they want to interact with us and create data or change data in some way or view some private data, then we need to challenge them who they are and see what their privileges are. Make sense? So that's one of the requirements, the overall requirement, that there should be something for the anonymous user to do, right, and not challenge until we need to know who they are. Okay, that's one of the general requirements. So user roles. So two types of human end users that would use your website. So for instance, for an online store, there might be sellers and buyers. For project management, there might be developers, quality assurance, project managers, business analysts. So there's many different types of users. Okay. In some cases, I always get the question, but I can't think of another user. Right. I have this application. You can search for movies, and it's just one user. They can search for movies. What other types of users are there? Right. That might come back to say, well, it is okay, consider the domain of movies or books or anything, right? Where in the domain of movies, you have certainly the person who's consuming movies, but you also have directors and actors and reviewers and critiquers, right? All those are all valid types of users, okay? So not only the end user who's searching for the movie, but there might be someone who logs in as Brad Pitt, right? And they have a profile on your website, yes. And any critique you make about his movies, he would be able to respond, right? And maybe he has a list of fans that follow them. Okay. It's okay for somebody to pose as a real user, right? A real user. So somebody might open up an account as a real director, okay, James Cameron or whatever, right? And their use cases would be that they could list all the movies that they've directed, any interactions with their fans, right? They could respond to them, correct? Right. Now, there's obviously the boring part of verifying whether this indeed is James Cameron, or this is indeed Brad Pitt, but that's the boring part. Okay, certainly we can find ways of verifying that indeed this person is who they say they are. But it's very common. For instance, Google allows you to do this, right? It lists all these stores, and some of the stores are very well defined who they are, right? Who owns them, and whatnot. But sometimes some stores are not, or they're listed there, but nobody has claimed them, right? And one of the options that you have is that you can claim a store. It says, yes, I am the owner of that store, right? Obviously, there's a whole administrative part of verifying that indeed you are the owner of that store. That's the back end part of this, right? The interesting part is that if I am the owner of that store and I'm the owner of several chains, right, I can interact with my patrons, right, that come to my stores, and they might provide reviews and whatnot for those stores. Make sense? So certainly there are many types of users for any one given domain. Make sense? All right. Always think about the domain in a broad sense. Who are all the players in a particular domain? All right? And how can I, what interesting application can I do to serve whatever set of users you choose? Okay? And you're free to choose who they are. For a restaurant, you have cooks and waiters and delivery boys, girls, receptionists, managers, owners. For sports, you have players, coaches, directors, spectators, fans. So it is okay for an actual player, right, to log in and interact with their fan, right, with their fans. A fishing journal, you might have a fisherman, you have partners, boat captains, right, charters. University, you have students, faculty, staff, at least two end users. Make sense? And each end user will have their own use cases, right, and their own user interfaces to fulfill those use cases. Are we okay? All right. Right, so the navigation and user interface should adapt depending on whether they are logged in or not. So for instance, one of the landing page, the home page, right? So the home page should be interesting, and it should adapt depending on if I know who is logged in, right? If the home page doesn't know who I am, it could certainly display generic information, right? The latest movie reviews, the latest restaurant reviews, whatever, right? But if I know who that is, somebody else is logged in. If I know who they are, maybe I can display information specific to that one user. So the homepage should be, adapt to the current person who's logged in or not, anonymous. Right? So either generic or specific to whoever's logged in. Make sense? Two roles. All right. So usually for undergrads we go a little easier. And for undergrads, it's just one type of user, right? Okay, but this is the first time I have undergrads in a grad course. Usually I have 4,500 together with 5610. Let me think about that. All right, so for instance, read through this. You also have an admin user, the admin role. And the admin role should have the capability, for instance, of adding new users, removing existing users, right? So being able to do the CRUD operations, create, read, update, and delete of users, and also of objects in there. So, for instance, if somebody wrote a rude comment or inappropriate feedback, right? If they posted something inappropriate, yes, the admin should be able to, for a given user, to select that user and see all the content that they've created, right? And then go into that particular review and then block it or remove it. Okay, for any user, any review. Make sense? So any content that the user generates, the admin should be able to administer it, right? In some cases, it makes no sense that the admin can edit it. In some cases, it makes sense that they can edit it. In some cases, it isn't. If it's content that is generated by the end user, it is okay for the admin to be able to edit it. But if it's content that is brought from a third-party API, maybe the plot of a movie, okay, or the recipe for a dish, right? That's content that was cached from a third-party API, yes? That we don't own that content, yes? You're only caching it locally for some reason, yes? And so the admin would make no sense for them to be able to edit it. Right? It might make sense maybe to remove it, but it might make no sense to edit it. If it's content that was created by the end user, maybe like a review, a comment, right? Then it makes sense for the admin to be able to edit it. Not only remove it, but also edit it, right? Maybe remove an inappropriate word or something like that. Make sense? So for content that is generated by the user, the admin should be able to have all CRUD, create, remove, update, delete. But for content that is cached from a third-party API, maybe just only delete and view, but not edit. Makes no sense to edit. So anonymous user, I mentioned earlier. If we don't know who they are, they should be able to use your application in some way. Search for movies, search for books, search for products, end user requirements. So the end user should be able to interact with obviously have a profile, right, and be able to interact with a third-party API. Right? Search for events happening this weekend, right? In my local zip code. Right? And so this would go to some API. It would come back with all the events happening around you. Okay? And in some tabular format or maybe a summarized view, right, of maybe a one-liner description of all the events happening around you. And then when you click on any one of these events, it would then navigate to a detail page, right, where you could see pictures, videos, description of the event, when is it playing, who it is, so all the details about that particular event. Yes, and then if anyone else, it could be that some other folks in the same community have already booked tickets to that event or something, right? Or they've already seen the show, and they've created reviews for that show, right? For that show, and says, oh, it was awful, blah blah blah, or you should get there early because it's parking is blah blah blah, whatever content that other folks might have added for that event, right, should be listed in that page. So that page, the details page, will be a merge, right? A mashup of content that is coming from a remote API, right? Details, movie pictures, and stuff like that coming from a third-party API, together mashed up with content that might already live in your database. See that? Right? Maybe from other users who have reviewed that event, or have reviewed that sports team, or have reviewed that recipe, or have reviewed whatever domain you choose. Right? It should be a mashup of. So that would be the details page. Yes. From that details page, you should be able to maybe navigate to that user's profile. Right? So you would see the comment and then the username of that person who created that comment. Right? If they click on it, you should be able to go to their profile page and see. Ooh, look at all the other events that they've gone to. Right? Or look at all these other reviews they've made for these movies or whatnot, right? And you should be able to, as I've logged in, I should be able to look at all this content, or maybe be able to follow them, right? Because this person, writes amazing feedbacks or whatnot. Yes, make sense? So certainly have a way to search and a way to look at details. So roles. So depending on the size of your team, right, the complexity of the project increases. So if you're a graduate, right, you definitely need the admin role, the anonymous, and role 1 and role 2, for whatever domain you have. Okay? For every additional member of your team, you'll need to come up with an additional role. Okay? So the complexity there is that for each role has its own set of user interfaces. Yes? Right? Each set of 1 or 2 pages additional that you'll need to implement, plus the data model that goes along with that, or where to store the information for that particular page and whatnot. Yes? That goes along with implementing an additional role. For undergraduates, same thing, right? You have a single role if you're one person. So for every additional member, you add another role. Required data model. So you need to store all this data in a database. Yes? And so here's a very generic set of requirements for your data model. You'll certainly need some place to store your user information, right? Username, password, first name, last name, date of birth, emails, phone numbers, addresses, all that would go in there. And these remember, there's 2 types of users. You might decide that it's the same collection, right? It's the same table, but then have an attribute that gives it the role. And depending on the role, you drive the interface, right? Of which pages you can see and which pages you can't see, depending on your role, right? And then you have a domain object, right? So domain objects, again, the domain is, you choose a domain, sports, books, right? Healthcare, Department of Defense, I don't know, whatever domain you choose, right? That domain will have different objects, types of objects. Yes, right. So if it's a restaurant, then you have a reservation, you have a table, you have an order, right? A dish, right? All those objects you'll need to perhaps store data for them. Yes, and they'll have its own attributes. Right? The name of the dish, the name of the sports team, the whatnot. Yes. So this will represent the particular domain object. So you can have a recipe, a sports team, a task, a fishing trip, a product, or a category, a movie, a song. Right. So again, depending on your domain, you'll have different objects. So there should be at least 2 types of objects. Right. Now, the easiest thing to do is to choose 2 objects that are somehow related to one another, okay? Or that one is the aggregation of the other. For instance, the easiest thing to do is something like, if you choose a song as a domain object, the second domain object, an easy one to come up with, is maybe a list of songs, like a playlist, right? Or if you have products, then you might have categories of products. So category is an object, right, that allows you to group together many other objects. Right? So once you declare 2 domain objects, so 2 users, 2 domain objects. So those are the data that you need to keep track of. 2 users, 2 domain objects. Then the relationships. Relationship between users, right? A user sent a message to another user. A user is following another user. A user is somebody's manager, right? Or they're part of a group that take rides together in the morning, right? Or play lottery together, right? To see who wins and they share. So some relationship between users, okay? Maybe they belong to the same team. Right, so some relationship between users, Then relationship between users and domain objects. Right? So a user likes a song, or a user purchased a product, okay, or a user created a playlist, right? So those are all relationships between users and domain objects. So somehow you need to capture that. Domain to domain relationship. So this is where I was mentioning that for the two domain objects, it's easier if you choose domains that are domain objects that are related to one another, like a playlist and a song, because one of the relationships has a domain object to domain object relationship. Like a playlist contains many songs, right? A recipe, right, is made up of many ingredients. Yes? Right, so recipe and ingredients are both domain objects of cooking domain. Yes? Right, and they're related to one another. One contains the other. One is the parent of another. Yes? Then down here, different types of cardinality. And going back to 5200, one of the requirements is that we need at least one one-to-many relationship. Right, so it might be that one person creates one playlist or many playlists, right? Or one playlist contains many songs, right? And then at least one many-to-many relationship, right? For instance, you might have actors in movies. So like one actor can act in many movies. But then one movie can have many actors, right? So you can have a many-to-many relationship. Yes? So at least one of those. I think that's it. Yeah. So that covers the general requirements. Yes. And I think they're fairly broad. That I think any project should have some of this, right, or most of this. Again, if you think your particular project falls outside this, see me and we can negotiate. All right. So down below we have some example data models for. I'm sorry. No, this is a very generic, high level class diagram that tries to illustrate all the different types of relationships. It doesn't mean that this is the diagram that you're going to use, right? It's just a very generic way of capturing everything. Let's see. We have two types of users. There they are. They are inheriting from a base class of person that has all the common attributes, and then you have the specific attributes for each type of user. And then here's a relationship between one user and another user. Okay, one user might be following another user, or one user is assigning a task to another user, or one of them is the manager of another user. Right? Here you have a hierarchical relationship of users following other users. Right? So this is a mapping table that maps this type of user to another type of user. The same type. Here you have a hierarchical. This is a hierarchical relationship that allows you to create hierarchies. Right? You have maybe the CEO, and then the VPs, and then the and then the managers, and then down below the engineers and whatnot, the architects. So this allows you to create those kinds of hierarchies. Right? It's self-referencing data structure. Here you have a relationship between a user related to many domain objects, and a domain object related to another set of domain objects. Right? So a user creates has many playlists, and one playlist might have many songs. Yes, and this association here allows you to create hierarchical. Oh no, I'm sorry. This one allows you to create hierarchical structures, right? Where you might have a product category that might contain many subcategories, which might contain many subcategories and whatnot, right? And this allows you to create, this hierarchy, like this tree structure, where the leaves of the instances will be the actual products. So that allows you to do that. Again, a lot of this you should see maybe in 5200 or 3200, which is the database for undergrad. Is that 3200? 3200, yeah. Okay. So those courses cover this. We're going to cover this in some some level, right? As much as we need. A little later, when we talk about databases and whatnot, we'll come back to this in much more detail. So here are some examples of data models for different domains. So here we have buyers and sellers here. And buyers and sellers, they might send messages to one another, right? They're both persons. Buyer can follow another buyer, right? Because you have very good reviews. So the buyer can write many. So here's a mapping relationship that says this product has these reviews written by that buyer, but that buyer can generate many reviews for different products. So this is a mapping table that maps, saying that this product was reviewed by that buyer. Okay, and this buyer reviewed these products. A seller can have many stores, and each store can have many products. And the products can be structured in a hierarchy of products and subproducts and sub-subproducts, right? So that's an example. Here's another one where you have students and faculty sending messages to one another, and the student has a mapping of grades for different sections that they've been enrolled in. So they're enrolled in different sections. So this is a mapping table that maps all the students in different sections to different students. Sections, you can have many sections for one course. One course has many sections. Right? Each section has many students enrolled, and you can have several teachers. You can have several faculty teaching the same section, or one section having many faculty, and you can have the faculty being the author of these courses, or vice versa. Okay. Here's another one that one of my students was working on. So this is like an art. The domain was art, and folks. So you have different users. You have an artist that can have many portfolios. Each portfolio can have many instances of art pieces, right? And there are different types of art pieces. It could be a hand-drawn art piece. It could be a performance. It could be a photo. It could be a written poem or a short story. It could be an audio file, right? And so those are all the types of art. And a portfolio can contain many pieces of that art. And that in an exhibition in a gallery. So here's you have a curator. Curator is a person who curates a gallery. In that gallery, you can have many exhibitions, right? And each exhibition can have many art pieces. Right? Can be listed many art pieces. Okay, make sense? Right? Yeah. So that allows you to capture the relationships between all these types of data pieces. Some of the requirements, some feature requirements. There has to be a homepage, and it has to adapt depending on whether you logged in or not. There has to be a login and then a registration page. For the registration page, you should be able to log in using username and password, but also log in with either Facebook or Google, right, or LinkedIn. Right, so that's one of the requirements. You should be able to log in with Twitter, Facebook, Google. There should be a profile page, right, where I can change my my personal information. From that profile page, I should be able to navigate to any content that I have created. If I've created a review or a comment or a recipe, or if I'm following a sports team or whatever, right? If anything that is related to me, right, I should somehow be able to navigate to anything that I've created that is related to me. Yes? Okay? Even if somebody has created content that is related to me, maybe somebody's following me. Right? That was not me. If somebody else created that relationship to me. So I should be able to see that from my profile. Okay? Maybe not on the profile, but there should be some page that allows me to get to that content. There should be a search and a search results. So I should be able to search some third-party API that's going to go to some public web service and come back with a result. I should be able to click on one of those results and look at the detailed page. I mentioned that already. There should be some social networking feature. Okay, typically, what most students do is that folks can just search each other and follow each other, right? And maybe send messages to one another. Okay, that's the simplest one. Some other students have instead integrated with social networks, and so whatever you post locally, it's also posted on Twitter or posted on their Facebook and integrate with that, or import their content from those profiles into their profile here, which is pretty cool as well. Yeah, so there should be some use of some web service, Yelp, Amazon, Best Buy, Walmart, Weather.com. So all these provide open source third-party API that you can search and query. A good place to get started is Programmable Web. If you go to Programmable Web, this is a repository of many APIs that are available there. You can search whatever topic you want, and it'll list APIs that are available, like the Weather Channel, Yahoo Weather, Weather Source, the CDYNE Weather. These are all APIs that are available that allow you to query for data. Right? And most of these are free. Okay? Most of them are free. What you want to look for are APIs that are friendly to web applications, such as APIs that you can query for JSON data, JavaScript object notation data. Right? That it's easy for browsers to parse. Okay? Most of them provide that format, but some of them don't. Just be on the lookout, right, for those that don't. Right? So ideally, it's something that already provides JSON. I think that's it. Styling requirements, already went over those. Some best practices requirements. Throughout the semester, we're going to go through lots and lots of best practices. Okay? And the assignments will grade you through all those best practices. You'll see me do it, then you'll repeat it in your assignment, and then again you'll repeat it in your project. And you'll be graded on applying those best practices, and using immediately invoked function expressions, controllers, web services, file structures, naming conventions, and whatnot. Deliverables. So we have created several milestones, right? That would measure where you should be at some point in throughout the project lifecycle. Okay, so 2 weeks from now, I think the first milestone is due, right? And it's called Project 1. That's the first milestone, right? And it will ask you to come up with a 300 to 500 word description of your project. Okay, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? It's okay if it's not a new problem with a new solution, right? And the problem statement, some high-level description of how you propose to solve it, 3 potential domain objects of which you only need 2, but I make you think about maybe a couple more, right? Also, 3 potential human users for your domain, of which you only need 2. Right? But try to think of lots of types of users who would use this, yes? And then choose the 2 that you want to use, or 3 or 4, depending on the size of your team. Also, for each one of the users, for each user, list 3 things that user would want to do with your application. You try to think, what would this user want to do with my application, right? Again, you're not going to implement all of it, but this is to make you think about it, right? It's not. This is very subjective, right? I just want you to start thinking about it. For each human user, list 2 relationships with other users. How are they related to other users? How about relationship between a user and a domain? How about a relationship between one domain object and another domain object? Again, you're not going to implement all of these, but again, to try to make you start thinking about what are the types of objects and users and what are they going to do. Okay? So that's to do in a couple of weeks. Then the second one, 2 weeks later, it's going to ask you for a design document. Right? It's going to ask you to create a class diagram, right? Describing all the objects that you're going to be storing in your database, right? And all the relationships between these objects. One really nice tool for doing this is Visual Paradigm. You're going to use Visual Paradigm to create a UML class diagram that's going to list all the classes for the object models, the relationships, the cardinalities, meaning how many of one and the other are participating, right? It should look like something like this, right? Some of these class diagrams. It should look something like that, with more with the attributes, with all the attributes, no methods. The attributes that are there. Also, if it's one-to-many, how many of those are participating? But this one is good enough. Any questions so far? That's project number 2. Number 3, it's going to ask you to create a proof of concept where you're going to have a chance to practice with the API that you chose. Right? And there are 2 things really that you need to be able to do with your API. You should be able to give it a query, and it comes back with a list of results, okay, that meet your criteria. So that's one of the things you need to prove that you know how to do it. Okay, it doesn't have to look pretty. You just have to show that yes, I can type in something. I say go, it goes out, and then it comes back with some results, and I'm gonna render them. Again, it doesn't have to look pretty. You just have to prove that you can search something. And the other is being able to, for any one of those results, I should be able to retrieve more details about any one of those objects. Okay, the first query returns a summary of some sort, right? And when I select any one of those objects, it gives me more details, right? So for instance, I might choose a noun or a phrase. It might come back with lots of interpretations of words. If I click on one of them, it will come back with maybe all the definitions, nouns and verbs, and how any thesaurus or whatever, any details about that. Or if I search for a movie, for title, Batman, it comes back with 20 movies that have Batman in their title. Yes? And if I click on one of them, it'll go back and fetch more details: the plot, the directors, all the actors, pictures, posters, how much money they made, what their Rotten Tomato rating is, PG-13, yada yada, all of the details. Make sense? Again, for the proof of concept, it doesn't look pretty, but you need to prove that you feel comfortable that's going to work for you. Yes.
Is it supposed to be on a web page, or can be just a postman?
Oh no, on a web page, an actual web page. Yeah.
And is it supposed to be like a proper URL API, or can be an SDK which is indirectly calling an API. In the back
No, it has to be an actual URL call.
Okay.
Yep. Those libraries are also, you can use those libraries, and I have a requirement, I have a soft requirement for that as well, if you have a library that you want to use. Yep. Project number four says, okay, now that you feel comfortable with the API, right, that you can query it, okay, start integrating it with the rest of the application, right? Some objects you like to bookmark, right? For instance, as you're querying and looking at details, none of this information is going in your database, right? All this data lives in somewhere else. You're only perusing through the data. You're looking at searches, and you're reviewing and looking at details and whatnot, and you can do all this long. Your database is clean. At some point, somebody's going to say, "Ooh, I like this book," right? And I'm going to bookmark it, or I'm going to write a review or a comment or something. That needs to be stored somewhere in your database. Yes. So it starts. You have to start integrating that third-party API with your application. You need to store it in the database. You need to be able to see the books that you've reviewed, or you've bookmarked, or you've liked, or that you don't like, whatever. Right? Start integrating with the rest of the application. With your profile, from your profile, you should be able to see books that you've bookmarked, books that you've liked, recipes that you've created, whatnot. Yes. So start creating the prototype. So the prototype should be a rough implementation of your application, right? Where you should be well underway by this time, right? And finally, the last 2 or 3 weeks is just completing the application, right? And these dates that for when these things are due are fairly lenient, right? Ideally, you would be way ahead of these dates. Okay, this is like the absolute last by this time, right? That you should have completed these various. We ask you to simplify grading. We'll ask you to create certain users, right, with certain usernames and passwords, so that the TAs will come back and be able to validate. We'll ask you to document all these things, creating several wiki pages on your repository. Yes? The last one that we're going to ask you to create for us is test cases that verify all these requirements. Right? How did you verify that these requirements are valid, that you implemented all these requirements? And we'll ask you to put step-by-step instructions, very detailed instructions that we're going to follow, right? And verify that, yes, you can create a relationship between a user and a domain, or a user and a user, or query for some data, or view the details. And you ask us, type in Batman. Now click on the third element. Verify that you have a poster of Batman Begins and whatnot, and the director is X. Okay, and we're going to follow your instructions by the letter. Right? We're not going to try and break it. We'll follow your instructions. Once we verify that's done and that's working, then we'll start, just randomly going around to see if anything breaks. Right? We're not going to deliberately try to break it. Okay. So yeah, you're going to provide your own testing. So this is a rubric. I think I've updated it. This might be an old version. It's online. It's part of the in Blackboard. Okay. Any questions? Make sense?